You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
I want to introduce a tradition here for this podcast and all future podcasts, wherein I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Knowing the stories of the Aboriginal people will always be written in this landscape. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change. So in the last episode, I took a leap into the sciences, and that was to talk about an article by Dr. Sarah Mackay about the fact that we need to let go of the idea that we have a reptilian brain embedded deeply in our existing brain. So it's a bit like a three-layered cake. They actually call that the triune brain theory, established in the 1960s. And I want to carry on a little bit about the whole notion of, how do we understand human behaviour, and, specifically in line with making good men great. How do we understand male behaviour, gender behaviour, sex, the whole, nice kit, right? And there's been lots and lots of assertions made. And I want to sort of help people to understand how we can be more discriminating about what it is that we're told, we read, and what is presented to us. Okay, so there was a book released in, I can't remember now when it was, but it was called "Why Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus," and it was basically completely unsubstantiated by any evidence. But it took off. People loved it. And I still get people going, this explains why my wife and I are having some challenges getting on, because, she's from Venus and I'm from Mars, and, we have to find ways in and around that. But it was based on absolutely no scientific evidence and so on. So, again, I'll come back to that fundamental notion that a lot of what it is that we engage with in terms of beliefs, opinions, ideologies, are stories that we are telling ourselves. Yuval Harari has also talked about this. And so one of the really influential ones that has emerged, in recent times has been that of evolutionary psychology. And it's sort of really taken off in from the 1980s onwards, especially through the University of California in Santa Barbara. And part of this podcast is I'm going to draw fairly heavily on an article that I found called The Critique of Evolutionary Psychology by Kirk Honda. And it was written in 2014. And I found it really, really succinct. Kirk did a phenomenal job in doing some really good research about trying to understand evolutionary psychologists not being an evolutionary psychologist, okay? And so when I read this, I thought, this is actually really good. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail that he does because it's a fairly lengthy article, but I want to use this to help people to understand that a lot of their assumptions that they make about masculinity, femininity, about gender relationships, about how we as human beings function individually and socially, need to be very, very carefully examined. Right? In other words, we need to be seriously skeptical about what is presented to us. And we're particularly prone to the whole notion of clickbait in our society. And, if we consider that evolutionary psychology is one of the fastest growing fields in human sciences, then we need to be even more skeptical. Now, the question is, why is it so popular? And I think it's basically really, really popular through the media. Things like the selfish gene, um, you know, and you really got to read Richard Dawkins very carefully in order to understand what he's getting at. People have misinterpreted the whole notion of the selfish gene in all sorts of different ways. But there's also, the notion of the alpha male, the alpha female. There's ideas about the warrior gene, and if you have the warrior gene, obviously you are going to be more prone to aggression, and that fundamentally human beings are, geared biologically and neurologically towards aggression anyway. Now, I'm going to argue some of those points because we need to understand where these propositions are coming from. And in a lot of cases, they are simply that, they're propositions. We infer that from our hypothesis and some of the information that we collect that we then translate into evidence. And this is where we can really get into conflict because a lot of this stuff is controversial and they're completely unsupported claims. And so evolutionary psychology's really garnished a tainted reputation. And so we need to be careful. So one of the things that we need to do first off is we need to understand how theories are evaluated. Now, in evolutionary psychology, we know that a lot of it's about speculation, that we can infer what's going on in human behavior from our ancient, let's say, African ancestors. Now, for some authors, it might be tempting to invent stories about our origins to justify some predetermined conclusion. And as with any field, or researchers in evolutionary psychology have been influenced by political and sociocultural factors. We need to keep that in mind. So, for example, researchers have been known to propose that men are naturally more aggressive and by implication are therefore excused from aggressive behaviour. Now, I'm not quite sure how that works, other than I can see this in a court of law where I can use a mental health argument is that the person killed someone because they were clinically depressed and their reasoning was sort of impaired. So, are we arguing that, because I'm naturally predisposed to aggression, then I will act aggressively because my reasoning, logical mind can't override the impulse? Okay, some food for thought. So how do evolutionary psychologists test their theories and their hypotheses? Or how do they develop theories through their research? Well, there's 5 of them. There's the twin studies, there's animal research, there's cross-cultural research, there's computer modelling, and then there's looking at modern hunter-gatherers. Okay? Now, twin studies are simply where if twins are separated at birth and placed into different families, we look at their behaviour and we sort of, see whether those twins act similarly. Okay, so one of the things that evolutionary psychology looks for is this universality factor. And if it's universal, it therefore must be innate. We've already got a problem there. Okay, the other one's animal research, and this is very, very popular, especially amongst, looking at primates and how that fits with human beings. Now, I always find that really interesting because when I look at primates, especially a biggie like gorillas, by their size and their power, I mean, these guys are seriously muscled. individuals, surely that's there to show dominance and you be utilized in an aggressive, violent way. But the irony is that gorillas are actually very peace loving, and they're very they're not aggressive unless they're really challenged. And then a lot of their behaviour is not directly related to punching the other gorilla out or the human being, but rather displays of aggression, chest beating and so on. So again, we start to see that there's some problems with the propositions that we're holding. Let's go to number 3, which is cultural research. And that is about seeking evidence to demonstrate that point of universality, that it's there everywhere. Look, it's amongst these people, it's amongst those, it's amongst, Laplanders, and it could be amongst the Iroquois. And so therefore, this must be innate. And the problem is that method of theory evaluation has limitations, and particularly that several ancestral cultures independently adopted similar cultural elements. Okay, so one example of that, and this is where I come into it very clearly, is misogyny. Computer models makes the assumptions that the human mind is fundamentally like a computer, and evolutionary psychologists are using mathematical and computational modeling to substantiate their theories. I've got a problem with that one right out of the word get-go. To me, the human mind is no real evidence that it operates like a computer. It's a good metaphor at times for certain things, but it's not really a good one to say, the human brain works like a computer. It's my book, it's very, very different. Now, number 5 is looking at present-day hunter-gatherer societies and saying that they represent how we were millennia ago. Now, again, there's some problems with that because, it assumes that modern-day hunter-gatherers are sufficiently similar to humans in the African Pleistocene savanna. And I don't think we can do that. It also assumes that modern hunter-gatherer societies are homogenous. In other words, they're all the same. And again, I don't think we can do that. So let me come into one of the favourite sort of areas of study in evolutionary psychology, and especially when we relate that to men, and that is violence. And there was a guy, Goetz, in 2010 who did some very extensive research and basically had presented evidence, and I'll put that in inverted commas, in 5 areas. And the first one was that there's obviously skeletal remains, in other words, archaeology, that shows humans were victims of violent, purposeful injuries inflicted by other human beings. Okay. The other one is that, we're talking about modern-day hunter-gatherer societies having higher homicide rates than even in the most violent American cities. There's also then number 3, which is the cross-cultural ubiquity of violence, suggests human had a violent past. And the 4th one, which I think is really interesting, is that chimpanzees and other mammals strategically use violence and aggression to negotiate their social world. And 5 is an interesting one because he talks about upper body strength is assumed to be crucial for men-on-men combat, and therefore men have evolved 90% greater upper body strength than women. To me, that one's particularly a long stretch of the bow, and I'll come back to the whole thing about the gorilla. So, without getting into too much detail about the study right now, let me sort of, take the whole thing from a critical point of view. Let's use Kirk's critique because I think it's a very, very good one. And that is, he says the fact that archaeology has found evidence that humans were violent with each other does not prove that we have an innate psychological mechanism for violence. Those ancient people had culture too, and this is the thing that really I find very, very problematic, is that evolutionary psychology does not factor in strongly enough the cultural context. And, it's possible that, since the agricultural revolution, in fact, I would argue very strongly for it, the idea of owning something meant protecting it from somebody else or taking it from somebody else to enhance your belongings. And so, there's a whole bunch of factors rather than this innate drive to possess, a tendency towards aggression. We also don't know how that violence emerged in those situations where we have evidence for human beings injuring and killing others. It could be argued that ancient humans were mostly non-violent and only violent in times of crisis. So it's a lot more complicated than what it appears to be on the surface. Now, again, one of the things that evolutionary psychology gets into then is things like domestic violence and jealousy in particular. And I spoke about that in the last episode. And again, some of the assumptions and claims that are made by the evolutionary psychologist on closer examination often can be really critiqued and argued. We need to be very, very careful, because a lot of people take this material these days and publish it into a book, put it into a program. It's a bit like, lizards can't be leaders. That's, again, coming out of that, reptilian brain hypothesis. And evolutionary psychology is, as I said, prone to that. So he was a bit more academic material, and some of you might, by this stage, have switched off, but please try to stay with it. If we're going to understand and inspire change, as I keep saying, we need to make those changes based on science, not mythology, not beliefs, not ideology. And as much as evolutionary psychology appears to be a very powerful way of explaining human behavior, it has some serious methodological flaws, and we need to be really, really careful in adopting that. Whether that be about sex, whether it be about gender, whether it be about hierarchies, like dominance hierarchies, whether it be like, aggression, warfare, conflict, management of conflict, and so on. This is not simple stuff, and it does require a bit of brain power engaged in the whole process of evaluating what is it that I want to take on board. As a reasoning human being, right, I have choices that I can make based on my understanding and not simply accepting a story. It's a bit like, the old Isaac's work on intelligence, right? That African Americans were less intelligent than white Americans, white privileged males in particular. And, again, much of his research has been critiqued and basically taken out of the out of circulation, because it's just wrong. It's not how it works. And again, the way that research was applied and interpreted and then published became a serious problem. All right, until next time, I'm going to pick up a little bit more with this in the next episode, because I want to talk about violence and jealousy together and look at it a bit more clearly, because again, I'll keep coming back to hearing from people that jealousy is a natural, innate driver, and it isn't. Okay? So think about your own experience. And on that note, I'm going to leave you to it until next time.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at noirtainment.com.